All right, you are live, Ryan.
I am live. Okay. All right, everyone, welcome back to the final day of the 2020 NFL Draft. We're breaking down rounds 4 through 7 for NFL Draft Bible. Ryan Roberts here. We're expecting a few guests in today, but for now we have John Murphy. We have David Turner in as well with me. Going to kind of just go through mostly just recap of most of the drafts that we could do today because it's going quick. It's going fast. We don't have time to just kind of recap every single pick. So we're more going to stick to overall players, overall teams, draft boards, see how they did, how we think that they finished off, how they filled needs. And then we're going to talk about some trades that we happened over today. We got Marquise Goodwin going over to the Eagles. Not a huge one, but of course, Trent Williams now on the move to San Francisco, which is a huge move. Let me start by introducing in again John Murphy. John, talk to me a little bit about the Trent Williams trade, man. 5th round, obviously in this draft, 3rd round next year. Just the overall opinion on that and how much that makes that San Francisco team that just was, in a Super Bowl, how much that makes them a better team for next year.
Well, a couple of things you see, obviously, how much Joe Staley respects the organization by kind of giving them the heads up about his opinion of where he stood and what his future was. I think it'll be very interesting to see if the Niners have Richard Sherman meet Trent Williams at the airport and pick him up. Maybe they can kind of work things out at the airport when he gets there. Obviously, you heard a lot of teams, the Jets a little bit. You heard the Cleveland Browns possibly in the mix, and a few others. But, at this point, I think both sides kind of resigned themselves to just getting something done. And for the Redskins, just probably getting away from this is as much, a fresh look, for both sides. Obviously, some of the things Trent has had to say about his time there with the Redskins in recent years has not, probably gone over well with the locker room and the veteran players that are there. So I think it's a good fresh start for both sides. And, the Redskins, are able to get something out of it that's at least manageable for them. And then the Niners get an offensive tackle that, when healthy is equal or better than, what they were getting out of Staley at this point of his career. So kind of a win-win, I think, on both sides. And then the Niners are able to follow up and kind of retrieve the draft pick that they traded, by making another trade. So I think, kudos to the Niners for kind of a heads-up move there on both sides.
Absolutely, and obviously, a part of that, you mentioned Joe Staley now retiring, so Trent Williams seemingly going right into left tackle, because that was my thought early on was, what's Staley going to do? And then he announced a retirement a couple minutes after that. So obviously a huge move for the Super Bowl runner-ups this past year. The rich get richer. David, just your immediate thoughts on that trade, Trent Williams to San Francisco, and what I know right afterwards, the Redskins drafted Sadiq Charles, the offensive tackle from LSU. Just thought about both situations, how it kind of transpired.
Oh, I think the Niners absolutely come away smelling it with roses on this one. I mean, to get a player like Williams to replace Staley's, and Staley's saying he's retiring, that's amazing. And they kept it quiet. Like, no, I didn't hear any rumors about Staley retiring. They were able to keep it quiet and keep the market down, I think, on that. So kudos to them. They also traded Bria later for another pick. So that was kind of interesting too. They've been very active, trading some players around, moving around this draft, targeting the guys they want to get and going getting them. It really is. It's the most aggressive I think I've seen them in the last few years, John and guys. Ryan, let me know if you've seen better. I just think this is a really aggressive draft. They got a taste of playoffs. They got a taste of the Super Bowl, and they definitely are trying to make the moves to come back. As far as the Redskins go, I mean, I know that staff really well, obviously working with them. I think this tackle that they took from LSU, even though he's got discipline problems, he fits what they look for in tackles, similar to what we had in Carolina. And I think the coaches, the offensive line coach they have there is second to none. So, I mean, he's going to get the most out of the kid, and he won't be an attitude problem with Rivera and those guys down there and what they got going.
Yeah, and I know the Sadiq Charles pick, like you said, it's the off-field concerns. Talent-wise, he would not have been in that situation there in the 4th round if everything was squeaky clean off the field. Obviously, there's a reason he got there. I'm interested to see if he really could early for the job. It seems like it's vacated. It's open there. And you kind of talked about it, David, a little bit. And I failed to mention that trade, Matt Breida going over to the Miami Dolphins for that 5th-round selection. I was just talking to my dad earlier today, and he's a Miami Dolphins fan. So I asked him, are they content with just Jordan Howard and then a bunch of mismatched pieces in that backfield? They end up going Matt Breida there. John, maybe you can comment a little. What can we expect for that Matt Breida move? Does that kind of, does that move the table for you a little bit? Is that something you liked? Is it just kind of a mismatch with Jordan Howard? How much do you think that move helps the Miami Dolphins moving forward?
Well, I think it makes you wonder if there was a guy earlier in the draft that they may have seen for that type of role as the change of pace guy, and then once there wasn't, I think value-wise, getting a guy that can do it. Now he's had some health concerns, but knowing that you have a guy that, has a high quotient in terms of, being able to make a play. And if he's touching the ball 8, 10, 12 times in a game, there's a big possibility for a big play there. So where they're at with Fitzpatrick and then transitioning to Tua, knowing that would be something they would want to have, that kind of change of pace guy that can also catch out of the backfield, kind of gives them a good, combo, to go there with Jordan Howard. And again, you're getting guys that can help you now, that can be on the field, in a variety of different ways. And I think they're, the whole AFC East, because no matter what the Patriots are doing, it's good until it's proven that it's not. But the other 3 teams have had very, very good drafts, and a number of them with some high ceiling picks, to go along with it. So I think, they addressed drafting offensive line. They were aggressive with it. They went after it early. Then they doubled down and, trade 2 draft picks, to move up and take the guard in the 4th round. So I think you saw them attack kind of the different areas. And then the next thing you'd want, for a young quarterback or to be competitive with a veteran quarterback is to kind of have that dual purpose backfield that they were looking for. And I think getting Breida at that point of the draft would be better than some of the guys that possibly went in the 3rd and 4th round. And again, you're getting a veteran player that can come in and help you win games next year. And when you're in a position like the Dolphins, yes, you need to grow with all these young guys, but you can't lose games, that are winnable. And I think the Dolphins feel like there may be some more winnable games on their schedule next year.
Absolutely. And I personally like what Miami is trending towards here. I was really a big fan of what Brian Flores did in his first year. The fact that he won 5 football games with the roster he had, the talent we get in there, I obviously trending in the right direction. We're going to keep you guys updated on some of the picks that are rolling in here. Again, not going to break down everyone specifically. We're going more from a team-by-team basis. Wanago going off to the Philadelphia Eagles, which is a really interesting pick. Before we get to that one, because I do want to talk about that one a little bit, David, just your thoughts real quick. We're talking about Matt Breida fitting in with Jordan Howard. How much do you like that combination? Because it seems that there's, Breida's more of the scat back, has a little more home run ability. Jordan, how do you like that those guys mesh together in that?
It gives you a 1-2 punch, and if you look at where this coach came from in New England liked to have multiple backs that could do things inside, outside the backfield, catching the ball, pass protecting, tough guys. When I was in San Francisco last year and I was breaking down Breida and all their running backs, he was a guy that really popped off the screen with his quickness and his ability to lose people in close quarters. So, I think I love what the Dolphins are doing right now. I love how they're attacking this draft in particular. They're not just sitting on their heels, but drafting. They're staying open to, again, getting players via trades and different things. So you really see Chris Greer and the coaching staff of the organization getting committed to those South Florida fans. And obviously I'm going to be a little bit of a homer. It's where I started my career. So, I really I watch what they do, and I've known Chris for my whole career. He was there as a scout when I was there. And, I think he's putting his stamp on this organization now, in this draft in particular, this offseason in particular. You're really seeing the quality individual he is, the locker room players he's picking. I don't see many character concerns. So this is going to be a different Miami Dolphins organization moving forward.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue. I kind of wanted to get into this Dolphins draft because we talked about Tua early on. We talked about Austin Jackson. Robert Hunt they took in the second round, offensive tackle, offensive guard, where he's going to fit. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Solomon Kindley, offensive guard from Georgia. Jason Strobridge, Raquan Davis, Curtis Weaver on the defensive line. They just took a long snapper, but it seems obviously the point of emphasis this draft, besides finding their quarterback of the future, is they are improving the trenches on both sides of the football. We talked about it a little bit, John. What are your impressions on Miami, rebuilding these trenches? Do you feel like we're going about it the right way with this coaching staff moving forward?
Well, clearly they've identified what type of O-line this is going to be, right? If you look at those three guys they drafted, clearly there's some good athletic ability, and versatility on the tackle side, of things. If Hunt can't stay at right tackle, you got a good guard there. I think, the Solomon kid, plays with a little bit of an attitude, has a finisher streak, in him, and would look like a guy that sooner or later will be able to compete, and play for you. So, anytime you can walk out of a draft and potentially say, you have any kind of 3/5 future offensive line there, for you, on the flip side, then they got productive defensive players who, again, they're not just needing starters, right? They needed competition, on their second level. They needed competition for their situational players. And I think you see that, Weaver, maybe not an every down guy, not a body beautiful pass rusher, kind of kid, but, he has very effective moves and knows how to get to the quarterback instinctively. I think you saw them being able to pick up, a couple of guys there that if Raquan Davis hits his high mark, he's an above average player for where they selected him. But if he doesn't, he's a very good, role player that they can use, as a situational player. And I think you saw that in a couple of areas. Brandon Jones, another guy, if he goes back to playing the way he did earlier in his career, you have a guy who can compete to be a starter. If not, you at least have a guy that's playing teams, can be in a package, can be in a role. And again, I think they got athletically better in all of the areas that they drafted, because at least now the compete level is not only for their starters, but is also for some of those backup guys who clearly were not good enough to be on the field.
I agree 100% with you, John.
Yeah, absolutely.
The competition throughout the whole locker room is getting better, from their offseason moves to their draft. Look at the level of competition. Again, they're drafting from high levels, so the practices are going to pick up. The whole tempo, training camp, whenever it opens, should be very fun to go and watch there at Miami, to see that competition throughout the whole roster.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you talked about Chris Greer putting things together. It seems like Miami Dolphins moving. I'm looking now at a draft that I really like so far, and it's Carolina Panthers. So we got Matt Rule in here. Joe Brady comes aboard. Everyone's just talking offense. What are we going to do here? They have gone exclusively defense. I'm pulling it up right now. I know they took Derek Brown, obviously, at number 7. That was their big pick. They got Yaturos Matos, Jeremy Chin, Troy Pride Jr., Kenny Robinson, Bravion Roy, the defensive lineman from Baylor. They obviously have identified the defensive needs on this team. I don't know whether that is they're comfortable offensively, or they just know that unit is the one that needs the most overhaul at this point in this takeover, in this coaching tenure. But David, let me start with you here. Just your thoughts about that haul that they have in general. A lot of moving pieces. We talk about positionless football. I think about that when I think about Jeremy Chin and some of these guys they have coming up. How happy would you be if you're the Carolina Panthers in the haul that they brought in so far?
Being part of that staff, fortunately, for 2 years, I know how Marty and Jeff and Eric and everybody there, they grade players, what they're looking for. They're Panther players. Look at every one of these kids. Coach Rule was just on talking about them. These are all high character, high effort guys that are going to run to the ball. They're going to give you everything they got every play, but they have talent. Every one of these kids has talent that's going to come in. They're going to compete right away. Again, creating a better practice environment, a better competition level. And they knew they had to fix the defense. This is, Coach Rule, when he went to Temple, when he went to Baylor, he found what they needed to fix. He identified the weaknesses, and then he went and strengthened them up. Right here, they're saying, hey, our defense isn't good enough to win in our division. They have to go compete against Tom Brady. They have to go compete against Drew Brees. They have to win these games and these matchups. And, they identify we're not good enough. So they are going to do what they need to be good enough to win on defense this year.
Absolutely. And John, to add to that, from a roster building perspective, do you have a problem with it being strictly defense? Would you like it to be more balanced, or is it something that you're completely okay with?
No, I think they're counting on, the coordinator to really work that offensive scheme. And you can do it at the college level, the way that, the LSU, did, kind of from 2 years ago to what they became in the last 2 years. Offensively in the NFL, it's still going to take a little bit of time. They have some of the parts there, but they don't have enough to have a high level, compete there on offense, without another year of a draft and free agency before it. But defensively, now that you've invested in all those parts, I think you would believe that, year 2 and 3, these parts will be the sum of their starting defense, to a lot of degree. And now they will have played together. They'll have time to gel. They'll have some of their, their kind of stepping stone and some of the issues that they'll have, just kind of growing with young players. But I think you would then hope by year 2 and 3, when the offense is gelling and you now have a complete competitive unit to go, against these teams and make your way towards a playoff run, that you can't be drafting those defensive players and then hoping the defense is going to gel when the offense is ready. I think doing it the way they're doing it, knowing that they're, it's going to take a little time offensively, but not to, be able to be more competitive in these games, have a more athletic defense, have more of the type of guys that they're looking for, to have on the field. I think it's a smart way to go, because if you're just going to throw it out there offensively and hope to contend with those teams, you're going to have a lot of 42-28 losses. And then this way, when you're developing your defense while the offense has time to mature, while they have a time to learn what the new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback are doing, 2 or 3 years down the road, we should be able to look back and say, hey, a lot of the core to their defense and special teams is coming out of this draft.
Also, look at what they did in free agency real quick. They spent money on offense in free agency. They addressed some of those issues and holes in free agency on offense with what they did. I mean, look, they went and got Okung, a tackle. They went and got receivers. Then they got Christian back on a big contract. So, they've spent some big money on offense to give those guys some parts. So here, like John said, sometimes the defensive players, it's easier to come into a league and be better, quicker on defense. They're just saying, hey, these young guys, they're going to fly around and hit some people. We're just going to fly around and hit some people, and then we'll figure out the scheme in a minute. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I hear, and obviously a great point. They locked up Christian McCaffrey this offseason. They bring in Teddy Bridgewater, who Joe Brady is familiar with for his time at New Orleans. They bring in Robbie Anderson. They have some weapons offensively, which, is obviously leading to this overhaul defensively. They know what they really need to improve early. I know I have Mr. Ron Hill that just joined, a lot of NFL experience working with the NFLPA Bowl this past year. Ron, inviting you to the show. How's everything going? How's the 2020 NFL Draft treating you so far?
So far, so good, Ron. How you doing?
Everything's good. Everything's good. And I know, obviously, with your work with the NFLPA Bowl, I wanted to start with you on just some of these NFLPA guys that have been drafted so far. I know we've seen Danny Pinter go off the board. We saw Jake Luton. We saw Sean Bradley. Let's start with Pinter, because I believe, unless I am mistaken here, he was the first NFLPA guy off the board in the 4th round to the Indianapolis Colts. Just your dealing, working with the NFLPA Bowl, what are Colts fans going to expect when they get Danny Pinter to come into the room? What type of player do you think he is?
No, I think he's going to be a good player for him. They make wise decisions, and it's interesting. The GM from the Colts he showed up at our practices out there, so you got a firsthand look at what at these guys, and he's a very, very good talent evaluator. And John Lynch showed up also, and if you look at San Francisco's draft and what they've done to help their football team, I think they've really done a good job this year also. I had Hawkins and Snead going, the defensive back from Cal, and then the kid from Louisiana Tech. I don't know if they went before Pinter or not, but
they may have. I know they went right around roughly the same area in the 4th round. Talking about Snead, I know he's a guy that we had on the podcast on the live a few days ago. Mm-hmm. big-time athlete, obviously went to the combine, did some incredible things. You want to give us a little rundown on Knee, because I know obviously he played a lot of safety this past year, played more corner in 2018. What type of player is Ladarius Knee? What type of player should we expect from him?
Well, he's a kid with some good size, good length, and I think that's going to give him a chance to be versatile and also compete on special teams and do those type things. But the versatility is the big thing with these guys when you're taking them, and it's the same thing with the other kid from Cal with Hawkins. He's a good tackler. He's a forceful player. That's going to convert over into special teams and also give him versatility out on the field too, as a player in the secondary. It's toughness, it's competitiveness, it's what you do with your next opportunity. And that's what all these young men have got to go through. The Moody kid from Tulane, he's kind of a skinny kid, but you could tell from the get-go that, he was going to get drafted. I mean, I knew the first day after watching him because he's so smooth and easy running and, fluid and catches the ball well. So, I think all these kids, I'm excited for them. Charlie Warner, the tight end from Georgia. You just walk out on the field and see some of these guys and you say, oh, geez, this guy's what you're looking for. And I think that's kind of how we evaluated these guys. Our scouts did a great job. Dane did a great job putting this thing totally together. And we had Raleigh, McKenzie, Dave McClellan, and Von Hutchinson. And all those guys are quality scouts. I really never knew them before. I'd scouted Vaughn, and I knew who Raleigh was. And, of course, I knew all of them after 40 years in the NFL. But we sat down during the fall and had a couple of conference calls, and I listened to them talk for about 4 to 5 hours, going over their area and these players. And, Dane does a great job listening. He does a great job organizing this thing and putting it together. And, that's why we had 30 guys invited to the combine. And to be honest with you, I thought we had another 12 to 15 guys that should have been invited. And I don't know what the league can do about that. I visited with Jeff Foster a little bit about it. And, Jeff really doesn't have any answers because they have a committee that kind of puts the invitations together. But these kids were going to go to the next 100 combine in Miami at the end of March, but obviously all that kind of got put on hold. So it's going to be an interesting draft. I think, just watching it, there's been some good decisions made. You got to make decisions for your team and what fits your team, and you got to fill your needs as you go along. Really rounds 1, 2, and 3, you're looking at those guys kind of pretty much plugged in as starters. These kids are going to have to find their way. But I saw an interesting stat on ESPN this morning when they were getting ready for the draft. 65% of the league is made up players rounds 4 through 7 and free agents. So that's a pretty big stat. So, through the years, Roberto Garza, Todd McClure, Shannon Sharp, we had luck hitting on these type guys. But you got to have a strong scouting staff, and you got to be able to make the right decisions.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's so well said. I feel like most casual fans are going to watch the first day, some of the second day, and then they're really going to ignore the rest of the 4 through 7 because they just kind of assume that those guys are fringe players. But like you said, 65% of the rosters in the NFL are made up of them. So we need to pay attention. Obviously, NFLPA Bowl obviously did a tremendous job this year. Talent, get a lot of players into the combine, several drafted. I mentioned Danny Pinter, and I kind of wanted to take it to the Colts a little bit here because I'm looking at the Colts, and they're in a position where obviously, we had Jacoby Brissett, who was very up and down last year. It's a really nice roster. They've added to that today briefly. Michael Pittman Jr., Jonathan Taylor, Jacob Eason, Danny Pinter, Isaiah Rodgers, a lot of really nice football players. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit, though, about Jacob Eason because he was a guy that I know some people thought could have potentially went a lot higher. He's a quarterback that seemingly has a lot of the quote-unquote traits you would look for, right? He's 6'5 plus, 230 pounds plus, has a rocket arm, falls to them into the 4th round. And I'll start here with David. Just your thoughts. How well do you think that he fits into that Indianapolis Colts system? Do you like the fit there in the 4th round? And how well do you think that he can learn from Phillip Rivers stylistically and potentially maybe eventually be that next guy in line?
Well, let me just go on record right now saying that Indianapolis is at the top of my list of what they're doing in this draft. Hands down. They didn't have a 1st-round pick, but look at the team they're putting together. They just traded up. They had 2 picks coming in a row, and they trade up in front of that to get 3 key players in a row. So, they're a team that Ballard and Ed Dodds and those guys that are there are really building a team for the future. They're going to have continued success. You're not just going to see a one-hit wonder with these guys. They're going to have success for years to come. Now, with the fit of Eason, I love the fit. I think if the kid can check his ego and walk into that locker room, Phillip Rivers grinds the hell out of tape. Phillip Rivers prepares all day long. Like, this is not a guy that's a nonchalant, and he'll take the kid under his wing. Like, he's all about, he knows he's got a year, 2 years. He wants to play 2 more years. So he's like, let me get the next guy ready. He's a teammate. This guy's a competitor. Ever since he was at North Carolina State, he's always made his teammates better. I mean, I used to watch him playing in the college and willing that team to win on some of these games that they played. So, I mean, I think he fell into a gem spot with a great organization, great talent evaluators around him that are always going to have a cast of characters for him to throw to protect him. I mean, look at what they're doing. This is a scout-driven organization that they're going to be good for some time. If he shakes off the ego that I didn't get drafted where I thought I would, I listened to too many people about maybe coming out early, whatever, and just gets in there and goes to work, this could be a gem for this kid and for the organization. I love the way the ball comes out of his hand. He's got all the measurables, like you said. He's got to work on his lower body mechanics a little bit in order to free up and to get more stable in his throwing motion. But once he does that, over a couple years of good coaching, man, this guy's got a huge ceiling. So I think it was a great pick for the organization. They couldn't pass him up at that value where they got him in the 4th round. And he fits perfectly with obviously what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. And just recapping a couple of picks, we have 216 Washington to Cameron Curl, the safety from Arkansas. 217 San Francisco takes Jawan Jennings, the wide receiver from Tennessee, who I know went to the Senior Bowl, did a lot of really nice things. He did not test well, but he's just one of those physical receivers, does a lot of nice things after the catch point kind of thing. John, kind of moving over to you with the same questions about Indianapolis. What do you think the upside of this organization is going into 2020 potentially? Hopefully, if we have a season, potentially how good this team could be, and Eason a little bit. How much do you like that fit? How much, and do you think that he could be the quote unquote heir apparent to Phillip Rivers?
I think the good thing there is that you obviously now, using that, where you got him in the draft. Once you can have, the assessment time to decide what can we do with him? What will he be with us? You now have another asset in Jacoby Brissett, at some point that will get you at least, if not better, than where you took a kid like Eason, right? And I think, we talked about the other day where some of these quarterbacks go and who you see them aligned with. First off, a GM who likes certain traits, right? And at that point of the draft, it's too hard to probably pass up on the physical traits that a guy like Eason has as a quarterback that probably, puts him above some of the other needs or some of the other players that would have been available at that point of the draft. Again, having the ability to then judge how close is he to being, able to be a viable backup, because this year, Rivers is, better than Brissett, but he also has the age to him. So, to literally be sitting there with a guy that doesn't have to play, that doesn't have to dress, that can kind of take it all in from both of those two players. We've seen how Brissett has made a nice move, to becoming the type of player he is now, which is much better than he was coming out, in the draft. And I think the other areas is that, they keep on just hitting what they've done well with, and then they go back and do it again. And so there's a lot of repetition, in places, for them to say that the competition there, while they're a team that's on the hunt towards, moving into the later rounds of wanting to be in that kind of playoff contention, they're not just sitting there with the roster they've had. They're kind of putting some competition on some of those guys. We mentioned Malik Hooker, the other day. You can see that they're putting the pressure, on some of their guys that have not performed up to par to either perform, or they're showing the willingness to not just kind of stick with the draft pick if it hasn't turned out the right way. And I think that's something that kind of gets them, moving in the right direction. And then, I think some of these other teams in their division have done a lot of the same, right? I think the Jets will be a team with a good, grade off of this draft. You definitely see what Miami has done. The Bills have fit a lot of good pieces that, on a roster that's highly competitive, they just added to that. And I think that's, what you see, good teams that are able to stay consistent, but able to compete when your main goal is to be playing games late in January, but you're able to compete at, the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, numbers on your roster. And that just brings your competition level, your practice, squad, improves. And like Dave was saying, your practices themselves improve when guys know that their position is not as safe as it was a year ago.
Mm-hmm. And Ron, I wanted to maybe go to you here, because obviously Frank Reich is a guy that I've been a fan of for a while now. The Colts head coach. He was, a good football player, was kind of that, stopgap quarterback that can come in when you needed him. Your thoughts on what Frank Reich has been able to build so far in his time in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I compare Frank a little bit to Gary Kubiak, because I was around Gary for 10 years in Denver, and both of them have great football minds. And Frank can manage the players well. There's a lot of respect in the locker room for him. Chris Ballard, he's got a couple of guys working for him, Morocco Brown and Ed. These guys are going to be future GMs here in the very near future, because they do such a – it's no fluke that they're having a good year drafting. They had a great year last year, and when you're picking guys like Quentin Nelson and this Eason kid, I saw him when he was a freshman at Georgia, I believe it was. And, you could tell right away this kid had talent, and he was going to go somewhere, because physically he looks the part, the arm strength's there. I thought both he and Fromm were solid picks where they were taken. I thought both of them would go earlier myself, because you can't have enough. This is a quarterback-driven league, and you can't have enough good ones around you to pick from. And so, I was a little surprised both of those kids lasted as long as they did, and I think Buffalo got a steal in the 5th round with Fromm.
Absolutely. And Ron, I just got a text from the boss man, Rick Saratelli. He told me that it might be time for you for me to say goodbye. So appreciate you stopping by for a few minutes. Really appreciate it. Just getting some insight, obviously, with your great experience. I really do appreciate you taking some time.
Anytime, guys. Appreciate it. Tell old Rick hi, and we'll see you later. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. And we're moving now to a different destination. I was just looking at the Dallas Cowboys. I wanted to talk about – before I do, let us just say we're going to be live here until 7 tonight to the conclusion of this draft. Geno Stone just came off the board, the safety from Iowa, to the Baltimore Ravens at pick 219. 220, the KJ Hill went over to the Los Angeles Chargers. That's a couple of the picks just to get us a little caught up there. I want to take it to Dallas a little bit, because I'm looking at this board, and we talked a little bit about Jerry Jeudy falling there. It wasn't an expected thing. They take Trevon Diggs in the 2nd round. They take Neville Gallimore, Reggie Robinson, who's another NFLPA Bowl guy that we need to talk about a little bit, from Tulsa, the corner. Tyler Biotish, who, if he was in last year's draft, what would have went a whole lot higher than he did there in the 5th round. And Bradley Anai, another guy who had a great Senior Bowl week, had a nice Senior Bowl game, and just was not was a guy that fell down these draft boards. John, talk to me a little bit about Dallas has, because I know obviously new coach coming in. Jerry's got McCarthy in the building. What are your expectations for that team based upon this draft and the roster that they have come back?
Well, to me, it seemed for sure, that like I said the other night, if I'm Jason Garrett sitting there watching this draft, I'm saying, well, I wish you would have listened to me a couple of times, the way clearly listening to Mike, there, because I think it was too hard to pass on. I think they even said that they had Lamb rated in their top 5 or 6 players in the draft, so to get him at 17, to them was too much to pass up. And then I think you've seen him, the combination of taking Diggs and Robinson, gives them, 2 shots at bigger DBs, 2 guys that can come in and try to compete to replace, Byron Jones and get them a little bigger and more physical, guys back there to compete with the kids they've drafted recently who were more of the athlete type, but maybe not as physical, as the 2 guys they drafted today, in the draft. I think the other pick, like taking a guy late in the draft like Bradley Anae, whose production is not, there's no question about the production. The question is, not the best tester, not the fleetest of foot, type guy. But when you look at where they then added pieces, kind of fits in right to where their needs are, having a developmental guy, right? You saw there was plenty of times where a lot of people had the Wisconsin center top 3 round, even better than that. I think there was a little medical, kind of red flag kind of here thrown in between the combine and the draft. And, the better, the more you watch, some more of his tape, a little bit of inconsistency, but not inconsistent when you're watching him play against Ohio, playing against some of the better guys that are in this draft. That film was, as good as almost any center in the draft. So to me, they get a guy that can compete, doesn't have to beat out, Looney this season, but probably gives them a guy with a little bit of a ceiling. And there's definitely guys starting centers in the league who are not as good as that kid, so they get a guy to compete there. Like I said, they get a high compete, wide receiver, in that component, and then fill in pieces where you're going to get a better pass rush out of Gallimore than what you've had using the rotational guys they've had there. Get a guy like Anae, who's probably a better fit, there than Christian Covington and some of the guys they've used, where they've just been trying to kind of bring in defensive line, but not really, get too much different in terms of production value out of it. I think they're a team, again, that, of those caliber teams that are projecting that they are playing games in January, the Cowboys are another team like the Ravens, the 49ers that have done a really good job, that the sore spots of their roster, at least now have a higher level of competition going into training camp than they did prior to the draft.
Yeah. And I know when we look at Dallas for a couple of years now, they've been a team that is not short in talent. So obviously we bring Mike McCarthy in, a new era. David, when I look at this offense now, we talk about Amari Cooper. We talk about Michael Gallup. We talk about adding CD Lamb, Ezekiel Elliott, Dak Prescott, Zach Martin, Tyron Smith. It is a loaded offense. How good can this offense be moving into next season?
Well, with Mike McCarthy calling the plays, this is going to get fun. I mean, I really like Mike. I like the way he calls plays. I really enjoy his creative nature with what he'll do with the different receivers, how he gets them open with the route combinations that I saw for years when he was up there in Green Bay. I mean, Green Bay used to be one of the most creative offenses. They would use, when I was advanced scouting for the Raiders, we used to go through and put for the coaches, like how many different packages. I mean, he would go from what's known as a 10 or an 01 package down to a 31 or a 32. I mean, he would run the gambit. So when you're preparing for him, you had to prepare for all sorts of different looks, different possibilities and things coming at you. Now they've given him the weapons. They're giving him opportunities to go back into that playbook and make those, make all those plays relevant again, and all those personnel packages come into play. And again, it's not a complicated system, but when you put different packages together and different personnel groups, I mean, you're subbing in and out. Maybe you're going to sub in a big nickel because he's got a 23 package in or something. And statistically, the analytics say he's going to run, 47% of the time when he has that package in. Well, then you got these players that can go win a one-on-one matchup, even in a 23. So, there's just different things that Mike's gaining in this draft, and Dallas as a whole are gaining in this draft to, open up his playbook and his ability to be creative, which is what you're going to see, a way different offense, I think, personally, from Dallas next year for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I apologize if any viewers are seeing any internet connections on my end. I'm being told that there is some inconsistencies. We are a victim, as is this draft, to technical issues. We haven't seen much. It's been pretty smooth sail, and I've actually been really impressed with the presentation of the draft so far. John, I kind of wanted to move into Denver a little bit because I'm looking, obviously, we talk about Jerry Jeudy. We talk about they got KJ Hamler. They got Akubanam, the tight end from Missouri. They seem to be really building around Drew Lock. Take me back to last year a little bit, though. What were your impressions of Lock coming into the draft, and how confident are you of him moving forward to be that quarterback of the future?
I think what they're giving him makes you more confident off of what you thought last year. That like, hey, there's a guy with a lot of high level traits, and now let's see where he goes and what are they going to put around him, right? So now they've gotten Melvin Gordon and Lindsey together. Now you've drafted two very different component wide receivers to give your guy another route runner to complement Cortland. Sutton. And now you give him a guy like Hamler who you can do a lot of stuff with, in terms of where you can line him up, what you can do with him, how you get him the ball. I think they double down behind Noah Fant with another, high-level athlete tight end who's not an inline blocker guy, right? He's not a guy that's, going to be a traditional tight end in that type role. But again, you're talking about Fant, who was one of, if not the most athletic tight ends pound for pound last year. You double down this year with the Missouri kid who was far and away, tested that way this year. It's again saying like, hey, if Fant can't play or, he's on the field and he got dinged like off of his best game, he was dinged and then not available, the following week. Well, you're giving the quarterback the same type look, right? The same type personnel available to him. And now you're giving Locke, with with his natural size, with the arm strength he has, better athlete, than some of these other guys that are seen with that size as pure pocket guys, that, hey, the Broncos, in a division where you have to score points, right? You know what the Raiders, are trying to do, and you see them paying attention, there to the same thing in their division. The Chargers, even though it's a different quarterback, but there are, a good number of weapons there, still. And obviously we all know that they're all chasing, the Chiefs, who are going to have a high offense, output. Denver's giving themselves a chance, to be competitive offensively with that quarterback. And then all joking aside, if not, you have prepared the table for whoever then would be your quarterback if this doesn't work with Drew Lock, right? So I think, again, it's a smart move because it serves two purposes. One is that you're giving a young kid every opportunity to be successful. And the second part is, if not, you now have a lot of young players in the building so that if you then had to draft another quarterback high next year, Denver could take full advantage of whether it's Drew Lock or a future high draft pick quarterback to have a lot of guys under small contracts that then allows you to afford the Von Miller, afford Cortland Sutton's next contract. Eventually you're going to have to do something with Phillip Lindsay. So again, it shows you what Denver's doing. And then on the flip side, another team that's doing a lot of the same stuff, but getting crucified for doing it, by us included, is, hey, Green Bay is trying to serve two masters, at the same time, right? They're trying to serve the here and now, and they're trying to serve the thing of not falling off the cliff, down the road, and having people understand that, okay, even if you can afford or, something with Jones and kind of put off the running back the way that every other team has, you're not going to be able to do that with Jamal Williams. So, okay, so Dillon is not, costing, Aaron Jones his job in the future. He's probably costing Jamal Williams, his job. And the same thing, like, hey, at some point, you can't have a guy, right? The Saints have always had just a guy until recently being the backup to Drew Brees. They were spending $22 to $25 million on Drew Brees, and McCown was making $1.50. So you can't afford to have everything on your roster, at one given time. So to now have that quarterback there and say like, hey, if we could rebuild this around, what will it look like in a metric if at some point down the road it was a Jordan Love, but he has 2 running backs, and he has, the components of what we're doing, and like I said, I think that they would be trusting right now that potentially one of those receivers that they've drafted in recent years and had kind of sitting around that have clearly not paid huge dividends yet, are they counting on Lassard to now be more of a full-time, asset? Are they expecting, one of those other 2 kids, we mentioned the Notre Dame kid, are you expecting St. Brown to suddenly show up and, compete and be a guy? Are you expecting the factor that they've done a very good job of finding and developing receivers off the beaten track that have then come in and become guys? They lost, Geronimo Allison, but that was an excellent, type pick that they made and were able to, get in there. The same with Lassard. So it's their expectation that, hey, we have the right scheme and the right coaches, and we trust our scouts that, hey, literally there are going to be receivers that come off the board here in the 7th and that are still available as priority free agents that can come in and develop as good as a mid-round guy, and that the other parts and components to it were much more important. That if you graded Jordan Love as a future starting quarterback and you're getting him at the part of the draft that they did, if you're addressing, a running game with the division you're in and the weather content that you get in the fall and into the playoffs, and you get a guy like Dillon who's not a slug, right? He's 250 pounds, ran 4.5s. You're keeping up what you're looking for, and you're giving your guy the same look, to say like, hey, when they've had injuries there, that's what allowed Jones to come on the scene, right? That's what allowed, Williams to then come on the scene. Now you're giving another, asset like that, to your locker room and, and to your game to say like, hey, if you were to lose one of those components this fall, November, December comes around. Well, I'm not afraid that A.J. Dillon can't take 8, 10, 12, or in a game end up with 10, 15, 12, carries and kind of get you out of a 4th quarter and get you a W. I think, they're both doing the same thing. We're just giving the Broncos a lot of credit, and we're giving another team, kind of a lot of flack where both teams are trying to serve today and tomorrow at the same time. It'll just be interesting to see how it plays out. But if I'm a Broncos fan, you're closer to competing against the Chiefs now than you were prior to how you thought they were going to go in this draft, right? So I would say you're closer now to what you needed to be more competitive than you were prior to this draft.
Yeah, and again, we're here NFL Draft Bible live stream of the 2020 NFL Draft. Ryan Roberts, John Murphy, and David Turner along with me. David, that was a really interesting point by John, just kind of the mirroring of those two. So kind of moving that, we could stay with Denver a little bit too. That balance that he's talking about, securing the, making sure the future is set, getting someone like Jordan Love when Aaron Rodgers' days are done, probably in 2 to 3 years, comparative to this team was just, in the conference championship game. They were just in the NFC championship game this past season. How important is that balance? And do you think that they are going about it the right way?
Sure. No, I don't think they're going about it the right way. I'm a little different than John on this. For me, I love the Love pick. I think it's great because he could sit there and be groomed, and it's not you don't need instant coffee there, okay? And the value pick's there. I don't understand not drafting a receiver with the talent in this class. I don't get that at all. I think Aaron Rodgers needs more help. You look at the team like the Philadelphia Eagles that has a lot of money in receivers, but they had a lot of injuries last year already in receivers. And what's Howie do? Howie goes and gets more receivers, young guys, cheaper versions, creating depth and competition in that roster spot. Now in Green Bay, I think there is a dire need for a second and a third receiver there, and they don't go get one. Also, they haven't done much on the defensive side. I mean, shoot, they lost the conference championship game because they couldn't stop a running back, right? And what have they done to bolster that defense in the middle of the defense? So my big WTF team for this draft right now is Green Bay. And and again, I'm not trying to kill anybody. Obviously, we're all in this business together. I just don't understand it. And again, like John has said throughout this whole time, maybe we'll figure it out down the line. It'll make sense to us a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. But right now, as a personnel guy, I'm looking at what Goody's doing. and I just don't understand it.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. And just to recap real quick, Arizona takes Eno Benjamin. Jacksonville takes Chris Claybrooks. We have a quarterback off the board to the Tennessee Titans, Mr. Cole McDonald from Hawaii. Minnesota taking Kenny Willekes, the defensive end for Michigan State, and Arlington Hambright from Colorado, offensive lineman to Chicago. Heard a little bit about him late, didn't get a chance to check him out. John, I saw your head shaking on the Cole McDonald announcement. Any thoughts there on that fit?
Oh, it's great for him, so
Good
for him. So just like most days of how the draft will go for you. It's not surprising, right? Cole McDonald, kind of funny little thing there that the Tennessee Titans, took a first round Hawaii quarterback and now replace him with possibly a 7th round Hawaii quarterback. So a little bit of humor, there for that. But I mean, when you put up the numbers, like I said, the sheer number of passes that kid threw, most of which, if you were on the East Coast or Central Time, happened after midnight. So good luck how long you stayed up watching it, unless you're, like me and Dave and have nothing better to do in life, But the number of throws that kid made, in a short period of time in college, and the factor that he has a huge set of, schnooks on him to be willing to keep throwing and making some of those plays that they tried to make there. I think it sports very well for him, because the one thing that will not happen, that I've seen happen a lot, both in our camps in the CFL and definitely, in all-star games and NFL camps, is you put that young guy who's usually the 3rd or 4th quarterback, out there at training camp. And it's so often that people have to blow the whistle because of the factor that the dude will just not pull the trigger, right? And that is a wasted play, right? And then it's a wasted down for everybody involved in it. And the one thing that you will know, when you're there watching the Titans practice, is there will not be wasted reps when Cole McDonald, is in there taking whatever 3 reps, in practice he would get, because he's going to rip it, no matter what, because that's just his level of confidence. And that's just the way that he's kind of grown up, playing the position. And so I think it's much easier to try to tell somebody how to rein it in or how to pull it back than it ever is to convince a quarterback or get that, sort of, check down Charlie, thing out of a guy,
gun shy,
turn him into that. Right. Because if you don't have it, it's not going to be something I think you can develop as a quarterback. And then he goes out and runs sub 4.6, and shows a lot more mobility, in terms of just that part of his game, to say like, hey, wow, that's an exciting athlete with a live arm and a gunslinger mentality, who has a lot of mental toughness to take the, the flack that he did for some of those turnovers. And I'll still say for the component of offense that they were running, it's not like it was a 1-to-1 or, it was not an incredible amount of turnovers. It's just an incredible amount of turnovers when you're looking at it from a pro perspective, but there's no one's going to play that style, right? No one is going to have them go out there, and whether you're down 50 or up 50, be throwing 70 times and 60 times and 48 times in the first half of the game, right? So I think I give him a little bit of break on some of that, but what I like about him is that, like I said, guys who can have success, when you're coming at this part of the draft or as a free agent quarterback, you better have something going for you. And what that kid has is he's got a little bit of that, whatever that quarterback thing that you better have, whatever that little intangible that you better have as a dude, he has it. And if he gets thrown in the fire or he's playing in a preseason game, it won't be shocking if he is overly successful, even in just that kind of, parameter for things. So I think a great opportunity for him. That's a great selection. I think, kind of Tennessee, the Eagles, I knew had a lot of interest in him, but probably jumped off of it after Hurts, went there. But I would have thought like Tennessee, the Saints, the Texans, teams that already have that kind of guy, that, Chiefs even, type thing. So I think it's a good fit for where he goes in Tennessee. And now it'll be exciting to watch at least the 3rd and 4th preseason game.
Yeah. And I know the Cole McDonald tape this past year. I watched 5 games, and it's a roller coaster. But like you said, it's much easier to rein someone in than force someone to get out of their shell. That's such a great point. I thought all along he's the guy kind of on day 3 that you really want to have And David, kind of moving over to you, just general thoughts on Cole McDonald. Would you be as excited to work with him as it seems that John would be if he was, running the team and getting them on board?
Oh, yeah. John hit it on the nail. I mean, John's 100% correct right here. You don't want to have to put a cattle prod up a quarterback's ass to throw the ball in the middle of a practice or in a game. You really want them to just rip it, make their reads, and even if it's wrong, just let it go. I mean, you don't want to have to say, hey, kid, quit checking it down. We need our DBs to get some work. You want them to rip it downfield, and this kid will do it. And if he makes a mistake, you know what? The kid doesn't get ego hurt. He's going to show up, and he's going to throw the next rep. He's going to learn from it. I mean, I love what John said. I'm 100% on board. And for the system he's going to, for the team and the coaching he's going to, he fits exactly what John said. He fits. It's a perfect fit for him.
Yeah, and one thing I really liked about him was, we talk about some of the mistakes he made. I just felt like his demeanor never changed, his posture. He was never
Right.
And he was never looking like he was feeling sorry for himself. And that's obviously so huge. It's the confidence in yourself to go back on the field after a turnover, after something adversity hits, and be able to rise above it. I mean, it's a little cliche, but I think that can't be undersold. As you say, the cojones to step back in that pocket and do it again. The couple looked like Chicago had back-to-back after taking Hambright. They took Latavius Simmons, a guard. Not sure who that is. So, Dakota, if you could give me a college in the chat on Latavius Simmons, I'd be really – Latavius Simmons?
Tennessee State.
Tennessee State, you said? Okay, got it. And then we had Sterling Hofrichter, the kicker from Syracuse, going to Atlanta, and Washington taking James Smith-Williams, edge from North Carolina, who I know is he went to the combine and tested really well for a defensive end of his size. He was in the Feldman's freak list before the season. So developmental guys, we're in obviously day 3. We're in 7th round now. We're talking about guys that you're trying to find traits, like John said with Cole McDonald. We're trying to find guys that about him. It's something that we can build off a little bit. I want to go to a different team. I feel like it's a team that we haven't talked too much about throughout the week so far, and it's the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, Joe Burrow, the number 1 overall pick. T. Higgins was their selection yesterday. They really revamped that linebacker crew, though, at the end of yesterday. Logan Wilson from Wyoming, Akeem Davis-Gaither. Khalid Kareem, I thought was good value there, the Notre Dame edge, pretty early in day 3. They got Hagee Edgy, the offensive tackle, probably moving into guard from Kansas. And then they just took recently Marcus Bailey, the linebacker from Purdue, who was injured the majority of the year. But on tape, he's a pretty nice football player. So I'm looking at this, David, and I don't know if you agree. Cincinnati Bengals, I really like this draft. I thought they may have a little more on the front offensively to maybe help out protection for Burrow a little. They only got Adeniji for that instance, but really that defense is shaping up. They get T. Higgins, who has a little parallel to AJ Green's play style wise. How much do you like what Cincinnati has been able to do this draft?
For me, with Cincinnati, I think they're hitting on some good guys. But then I have some question marks on the other guys. So, I love their first pick. I love their Higgins. I love a few of their players. But then there's some players that have some injury history, have some stuff that I'm like, there's better sitting there. And when you're at the top of the draft like that, you have the best pick in every draft, every round. So it's like there's better sitting there. And Cincinnati's limited with their scouts on the road. They don't have a big staff. They like to keep it quaint and small, and the way they do things there is limiting. So I think they get limited background and limited injury history on some of these guys, and so they can't take advantage of where some other teams are soaring, like Indianapolis, Baltimore, the Jets. Jacksonville, look what they're doing down there. They're really putting a stink on this one. San Francisco, Minnesota, these are just to name a few that I think are really heavy in their scout-driven departments, and you're seeing them being at the top of the draft boards with great drafts. I think they're filling some holes. Again, the Burrow's pick is tremendous, and it's going to be great for that franchise, but I think they've missed on a few coming down into this round, and between 3 and 7, I'm not really loving what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And John, kind of going over to you, we know Zach Taylor was a guy that was, it's a lot of people questioned the hire when he was coming in, obviously entering his second year now. With this draft, what is your thoughts just about how Cincinnati's been able to improve and whether Zach Taylor is the long-term best option for this team moving forward, and just kind of what we should expect from Cincinnati in this near future?
Well, I don't want to have a Duke Tobin moment, so probably should, be nice.
Yes, be nice.
Wow. But I'm just saying, I agree. I think it's hot and cold in the sense of, you can see where, at linebacker, they've definitely tried to go, similar to Baltimore, kind of go with the overhaul, there, they're now, definitely drafted guys who are better in space, which would probably be a wise idea. If you watch the lack of tackling their linebackers tried on Lamar Jackson and, a lot of the rest of the guys in their division last year, it looked like it was kind of not exactly what you were looking for, right? And now
not ideal, definitely not ideal.
Total opposite, type players, like way more athletic, at linebacker, way more of that versatile nowadays performer. I was really high on that App State kid, probably because I saw a ton of them. They played down here and they played in New Orleans the last 2 years in their bowl game, and he was exciting, to watch. He kind of had he's like the super poor man's, version of, what you're doing with Isaiah Simmons, right? You can play this kid in a number of different roles and spots and probably get, some good, tread out of him. The Wyoming kid, he is more of an athlete than a pure downhill guy. But again, out in space, make tackles out in space, be more athletic than the guys they have. I think that those were, two good, picks for them in terms of what they have on the roster and how they're trying to get better, at that spot. Still want to see what they do secondary, still to be determined. The rest of their O-line, still a little bit. And when you look and see that from a contract standpoint, right, and this can happen to the best of us, so, you're not going to go bananas. But A.J. Green, and, Tyler Boyd and what they have under contract, they are literally in the top 3 in terms of how much money contractually is in that receiving core tight end group, that group of guys. And I guarantee you we would not be only naming 3 teams who we think have better personnel in that group than the Cincinnati Bengals. So you are really handicapped with not only for Dalton, but now transitioning into the future with Burrow, to say that you literally have $30 to $40 million in cap tied up on those guys and what you're getting out of them. Right. And now, there could be a chance that AJ Green comes back and has another couple of really good seasons, out of himself. Kind of like the little thing, after being selected, that T. Higgins was actually at the same training facility, as Joe Burrow. So, okay, some interesting little, thing there where they may already be vibing, in things. But again, not the cleanest, prospect at that position. Some things he does well and some things he produced well with at the college level that would not immediately make me believe that he's a high yard per catch, guy in the NFL the way that he was, but again, you now have 3 guys, that competitively in that environment gives you an offense, depending on who's playing quarterback, to give them, more production, but still a overall roster that's a little bit not completely balanced. And one that you could still see there being some struggles there before, they sort of really get things rolling.
Yeah. And I could be remiss if I didn't give a shout out real quick to Dakota Follett. I forgot to mention at the beginning, he's been doing a great job behind the scenes for us all week. He's going to get us ready for a promo as I do a quick recap of a couple picks here. We're going to take a quick break, hit the bathroom, get a drink, and then we'll be with you guys for the last hour here, right around until 7 o'clock Eastern time. Dustin Woodard, center from Memphis, went to New England. Ben DiNucci, quarterback from James Madison, who was originally at the University of Pittsburgh, goes to Dallas. Carlos Davis, the other Davis twin, Khalil went a little earlier from Nebraska, is in Pittsburgh. And it looks like Casey Toohill, the outside linebacker from Stanford, just went to the Philadelphia Eagles to continue to help their edge duties. I mean, I feel like maybe he's an off-ball guy. We'll talk a little bit more about that, some more of the draft, so from some of the team-specific draft when we come back. But Dakota, if we're ready, we can roll the promo, and then we will see you guys on the other side of the break.
Good.
Clearly, the Danucci's called Jerry Jones and made him an offer they can't refuse.
Exactly. You don't want to be
Had
sitting
to
with
have.
dishes.
Yeah. He had gotten some tread lately. I'm not surprised.
It's back, the official 2020 NFL Draft Bible, bringing you the names you need to know first since 2002 with insider access to players, scouts, coaches, and the entire draft industry. The 2020 NFL Draft Bible is available now both in PDF or book versions, featuring over 600 in-depth scouting reports, more than 175 player interviews, official combine and pro day measurements, plus our 2021 draft preview and mock draft. The NFL Draft Bible is the official scouting service provider of the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl and is used by all 32 NFL teams. Log on to NFLDraftBible.com and get your copy today.
All right, and we are back here after that quick promo. We were talking a little bit about Ben DiNucci. We've been talking. It's been quarterback driven. This talk so far. John, kind of talk because we were talking about yesterday, which is an interesting point. This last day specifically is for really scouts kind of pounding the table. We talked about it yesterday. Like this is the guy we need to take. For this day, how different do you think it is? Because usually there's going to be war rooms where guys are bouncing ideas off of each other. How different do you think that this virtual experience has been just from your experience with it a little bit? And how much different do you think that pounding the table process kind of is now?
I think for me, it probably is depending on who's pounding the table, right? I think each team knows, who's really had that type of success in the past. Bringing somebody to the table or who just says like, okay, I got a guy for you and they've given you 9 guys. And, so I think it would be really important for people this year to be very specific, with who that guy is, right? Because that's going to be the difference maker, in getting a guy. You're not going to sign every area scout's wide receiver. You're not going to sign every area scout's pass rusher. And such. So I think to be able to have had those conversations, right? The funny thing about it will be, it is almost a lock that the Saints will find a guy in the, basically in undrafted free agency that fits exactly what, something they didn't draft by doing the moves and the trades they made, because now they've literally had the entire day to have those discussions, right? Mm-hmm. So now they are going to be able to capitalize on undrafted free agents in a very different component, because they literally could have had you captive on the phone for the last 15 hours because they've had nothing else, nothing else to do, right? You can
That's so true.
Right? You can only trade so many of your future picks, even in the Bobby Beathard, handbook that Mickey Loomis seems to, be tearing pages out of and using.
Might have co-authored at this point.
It's like, you have what you have, and now, hey, you know what? The good news is that where they made their picks, fortifying the interior of your offensive line, going out, and getting a pass rusher guy that maybe doesn't have an exact fit for some teams. He wasn't a perfect, 4-3 guy. He's not a perfect 3-4, but he is a pass rusher. So you can find a way to, mix and match him into the scheme. Then come back up and get a tight end that they clearly had a top 50 grade on, and that some believe was a number 1 or number 2 tight end in the draft. That is a perfect complement for their style offense, in terms of don't have to worry about inline blocking because they're not going to ever ask him to do it. He may not even get asked to go to the blocking drills at all, during training camp. Like skip that part and just keep going back to catching balls. Where they need a guy, don't tell me you can't find an undrafted running back, to come in and compete, behind Latavius Murray and be that next guy, the way they found Chris Ivory, Chris Robinson, and going down the list. That's an easy position to locate. Inside linebacker play, guys that can, be a sub-package player and special teamer. Very easy thing to find after the draft, and add there. They want a speed complementary receiver. Now, none of those guys are going to be Ted Ginn. But Ted Ginn at the beginning of his career was not, a full-on route runner that knew all the routes and ran all the routes perfectly. So again, finding a guy that has a good height, weight, speed combination. If they want to go right down the block, I mentioned Jalen McKeskey the other day, ran sub 4.3. Derek Dillon from LSU ran high 4.4s, at his pro day. Those type guys are very easy. If they just stayed in the state, there's 3 of them. So it's a very easy at some of those positions to find height, weight, speed, cover guys that need a lot of work. Easy things to find. A punter in a component, to start getting in a direction of knowing that your punter's not going to be around forever. I haven't seen the South Carolina kid come off the board, and he is built very similar, to Morstead, has that long, lean frame, has great extension, would be I think an above average competition, punter, and somebody that at some point in time probably will punt in the league, down the road. So I think the things that the Saints are looking for that they didn't address by taking 4 or 5 picks that can't make their roster and throwing all those picks together with a future pick next year to come out of the draft with 3 guys that might help them get one step closer to overcoming the hump before Drew Brees is on air, competing with Tony Romo, is a really smart way to go when they don't have a roster where 7 guys can make their team. 3, 4 guys, and then some guys competing that could be PR types. That's I think a very smart way to go about it, because that's a very interesting division, right? You see the Falcons, and they're trying to get one last shot at it, with Matt Ryan before they follow the trend, that the Carolina Panthers did, right? And now the Carolina Panthers, are there, and they are in rebuild mode, knowing that they might be kind of anchoring the bottom of that division this year, but not for long, right? I don't expect it to be a 5 in a whatever, and then multiples of those years. It would seem like the Panthers can make a quicker turnaround and be right back into contention 2021, 2022. We know what the Bucs are doing. They have, they're overly swinging for the fences. I think they just signed like Lou Gehrig and Gale Sayers on top of it, right? So, they're literally going after everybody that they can get in here for one shot at the championship. When the championship is right in your backyard, when you own the team and you do the kind of things that guy does, it's the smartest thing the Buccaneers could have done, because you know why? We are literally talking about the Buccaneers, right? And I think that's as much a need for the Buccaneers as getting out of those pewter pants, or as much as changing, Brady to from one guy to the other. Jameis Winston still has the ability to come and play well in the NFL. But when you change your franchise from Jameis Winston as the face of it to Tom Brady as the face of it, the amount of sheer money that the Buccaneers are going to make is going to destroy anything to do with what they could have had a record. What about the turnovers? What about his arm strength? What about whatever? The Buccaneers are now going to be somebody's favorite team from now on because of this. And that is dollars and cents that the Buccaneers can never get away from, because we've literally heard and spoken about the Buccaneers more from February till now than we have in the past 10 years.
Yep. And obviously well publicized at this point. David, did you think, kind of going into just on the football field more perspective and not really the numbers behind it, the amount of money that they're going to be able to garner, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, are you buying this team as a Super Bowl contender? Because I'm looking at this draft now. Obviously what we've done this offseason, they added Tristan Wirfs in the first round. They got Antoine Winfield Jr., Keyshawn Vaughn, we talked a little bit about yesterday, Tyler Johnson, the wide receiver from Minnesota, and they added Khalil Davis, the defensive tackle from Nebraska, who I'm a little bit of a fan of. Are you buying that this team is a Super Bowl roster under Bruce Arians this year?
Super Bowl might be a stretch for me at this point. Their defense played lights out back into that season last year. So, for me, I really like, and I'm a big fan of the whole coaching staff that's there. Big fan of Todd and, Coach. They were here in Arizona when I got to meet them and, spend some time with them. But these guys, they got those guys. Think about what they were just 2 years ago. They've totally got this team flipped around. They're playing harder. They're playing with more intensity. It's a competitive environment. The players seem to really be happy there. You know, they don't seem to be like they want to play for Arians. That's the kind of coach he is. So, you know, for me, I love what they're doing there. I love what they got. I don't know if they're a Super Bowl team at this point. Again, you got Tom Brady, who's going to have the number 1 jersey, or Gronk's going to have the number 3 jersey sold. So like John was saying, business sense, this makes 100% business sense. Now, is it going to translate to wins on the field? Yes, it's going to translate to wins on the field. Is it going to translate to Super Bowls? I don't know. I think they win their division, you know, with the Saints being right there too. So it's going to be them or the Saints this year. And then, you know, going forward, I mean, they still got to get through San Francisco. They got to get through Green Bay. They got to get through some tough Minnesota. I mean, shoot, look what Minnesota's doing today. They're doing a fantastic job. So there's the NFC is getting very, very competitive. Are they going to be a Super Bowl team? I don't know. Are they going to be in the hunt? Yes, I agree. They're going to be in the hunt. They're going to be a tough team. They're going to be a great ticket when they come into anybody's city. Everybody wants to go see Tom Brady and Gronk play. And again, they got Mike Evans. You got all these other offensive weapons. You got a great defense at this point. So, I mean, it's going to be a very competitive team. It's going to be fun to watch this year. Super Bowl, I'm not putting my bet there, though.
Okay, fair enough. And kind of to recap real quick, Clay Johnston, the inside linebacker from Baylor, went off the board to the LA Rams. Detroit, Jashawn Cornell, the defensive tackle from Ohio State. Green Bay picked up Vernon Scott, safety from TCU. Tennessee traded their pick to Kansas City, where they took Thacarius Bo-Pete Keys, the cornerback from Tulane. I know some people are big fans of him. And TJ Brunson, the linebacker from South Carolina, going off to New York Giants. The first team that I read off there was the Los Angeles Rams. I want to ask, and John, I can start with you here. We're talking about how we build a roster. And obviously when you pay a quarterback big money like they paid Jared Goff, you're allocating a lot of funds, a lot of investment into one position. We talked about Todd Gurley got the big contract. Obviously that one backfired on him. I feel like they're just the majority of I forget what the percentage of their total payroll was built into like 5 players. How flawed do you think the Los Angeles Rams are? Just how you build a team, build a roster. What's your perspective on how they are building that team?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they expand to everybody making the playoffs next year, they have a good shot. If not, God bless. Because I think when you get to that point, and they're not the only team, they're far from it. You look at it, Andy Dalton is the Bengals franchise quarterback, right? Goff is the Rams franchise quarterback. But in all reality, they are B level, they can't do it themselves. And to me, that's where the stopping point should be in terms of when you are thrown into that scenario. If the Cowboys believe that Dak can do it that way, then aggressively go and give him that money. Obviously, Mahomes can do that, right? At some point in time, he will not have all those guys. But you would believe that if you threw 5 guys out there, with him, that he would turn out, a similar amount of points, there. And it doesn't have to just be with Tyreek Hill and Watkins and Kels and stuff, because, hey, Robinson has played. And the Byron, the Kansas State kid last year, played 1 game and went off for him. So the factor that he can do it with a lot of different moving parts, and even when they don't have Hill, or even when Kels is out, or even if Watkins has been, that he's still producing those numbers at a high level, well, then the scheme and the system is allowing that to happen. If you're only able to kind of put that around, a quarterback like Goff, for instance, for a short period of time, and then as soon as you paid him, it neutered the rest of your roster, to where you're having to make these choices and decisions, it makes it really difficult to then stay at a high compete level, because you're kind of constantly kind of stealing from Peter to pay Paul on your roster. And you can see where, like, hey, they get a guy like Little John who they develop, and now they can't afford him, and now they have to go off and do that and deal with that part. You got to get rid of your receivers, and now you got to replace them with younger guys. You're hoping now a combination of Malcolm Brown Cam Akers can give you enough in the backfield. But the problem is, at least with Gurley, it took some of the pressure off, right? You were afraid to send guys, when you have Todd Gurley as the option. Opposing teams in that division are not going to be afraid that they have Cam Akers and Malcolm Brown in the backfield. So you're getting them, playing them in a much different way, than they were before. And I think that's leading to where the struggles will come in there, where they have a number of still high caliber guys, but one at a time they've had to kind of move out of those players in order to get back. And I think the Rams would be kind of more in that, 6th to 10th, team in the conference now, to where their chances of getting in are not just how well they can play, but someone else has to not play well. And the problem in that division is the Niners are better than them. Seattle's probably better. And there's a likelihood on a flip of a coin, I might take Arizona this year, saying that Arizona's win content could get up to where them and the Rams are not, too far different now. Even if you don't know who all the Cardinals guys are and you know who the Rams players are, man, it's hard for Aaron Donald. It's hard for their difference makers to make a difference when you're now playing a team that's got a wild card offense the way the Cardinals have. And now their players that they have, they can afford for the next year or two because they have Kyler Murray on the deal that you had Goff on beforehand. Once Kyler Murray's making $18 to $25 million, if he is one day, they won't have, DeAndre Hopkins on the team. They won't have, they won't be able to afford, to do all the things they're doing. So I think they took advantage of it when they could. And then I think the mistake was made that when they didn't beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, you didn't kind of rethink it. You just sort of threw all of it at the wind and just said, screw it, I'm going for the juggernaut, right? And again, I kind of focus back on the Saints and some other teams. Look at what Seattle has done. They kind of took a step back to take a step forward, but the step back has not been as big of a step back, as it has been for other teams. The Saints got to a point where they were like, hey, we can't win with that group that we won with. We got to kind of let it all go. We're going to let those pieces play out and move along. And they reinvested defensively. They reinvested on, hey, younger offensive players to get the ball to them. And all of a sudden you come out of, Kamara and Thomas, but you come out of it with a defense that can hold their own a lot of the time. It's a much more balanced team to say that, hey, how they play and then how the Rams are playing right now. That's why, I don't see the Rams as being a team that's competitive, right now as much for the whole NFC. I think they're in a real battle right now, right? They're behind on the scorecard. They don't have knockout power, and they're in Vegas with the judges. They're not retaining that title unless they come up with something to get themselves out of harm's way, and they don't have enough rounds left to win by a decision.
Yeah, and we're only about 15 picks or so away from the end of the draft, so we see who Mr. Irrelevant is. I know this is obviously a draft segment live from the 2020 NFL Draft. I'm looking at this, though, Dave. Obviously, we're talking a little more about from a team-building perspective. When we look at the Rams, John already mentioned, Cam Akers, Van Jefferson, Terrell Lewis, Terrell Burgess. I feel like they added some good football players, but we're talking about, and John, I don't know if politically correct to use the word neutered, but I'm going to say that, allocating those funds the way they did definitely shrank their window. It accelerated how long that window could potentially stay open to be a championship level team, how they used their roster building philosophy. Are you buying that the window is almost closed for the Rams, or do you think that there's some way that they can kind of reverse this a little bit and get the organization back on track to where they were just 2 years ago?
No, I think they can get back there, but the whole thing that John's alluding to, if I understand him correctly, is that they have to make some hard decisions, and they have to look in the mirror and be honest with themselves. Like he said, Seattle looked in the mirror and said, listen, player 1, 2, 3, 4 aren't getting it done. We love them. We want them here, but they're just not getting it done. And so we got to let them go and reallocate the money to other resources that we believe are going to get it done. The Saints did the same thing. So it's a hard conversation. Bill Walsh once said, the hard conversations aren't the ones where a player makes it for you. And that meaning their play level on the field sucks. Their effort in the weight room's terrible. Their disruption or distraction in the locker room. Those are the easy conversations. Say, hey, buddy, I'm taking your job. You're not doing your job to my satisfaction. The hard conversations, as Bill Walsh talked about it, was conversations like Bryant Young, Joe Montana, guys that have taken pay cuts, guys that have been there for him in the trenches and tough times and sucked it up, played through injuries, and he still had to make the decision of letting them go, going in different directions. So that's the hard conversation. That's the one you don't want to have. That's the one you're avoiding. But to do your job as the right general manager, right head coach, whomever's making that decision in your organization, that's the one you got to look in the mirror and make that conversation happen. If the Rams make that conversation happen, they have talent on the team and they can go do it. I know some of their evaluators. I get what they're trying to do in some senses, but I don't think they're having the tough conversation of, yeah, we've been hanging on to this guy a little too long and we really need to do this, or we can't afford that. Sitting back and saying to a guy, we can't afford that guy or this right now. We need to, this player's salary actually will cost us 3 or 4 players. So we can't do that right now. You got to have those tough conversations. I know I've had them through my career. When I first started having them with Mr. Davis in Oakland, man, you talk about nerves. I was sweating down my ass crack. But I was shaking in some of them. I'm not even gonna lie. I was a young man having these conversations that were above my level, but he would rope you into these conversations to get you and groom you for these tough situations as you got older and when they became your conversations. Then when I got into the UFL and arena football, where I was working directly with coaches and general managers, and then up in Canada with Brock as the GM, it'd just be him and I in a room, and we'd have to have tough conversations. And you got to be honest with the man in the mirror. What's your job? Put a championship on the field. That's your job. Your job's not to save this player, save that player, make this guy feel good, make a coach feel happy. Your job is to put a championship team, caliber team on the field. Put that roster together. Make sure there's depth, like we see about some of these great drafts today. John was just alluding to it. They're building the depth. They're making the cupboard strong. So if a guy goes down or a guy you have to make the tough decision come training camp time to cut some salary one way. You're not hamstringing your coach where he doesn't have another option in that freaking cupboard. You got to have that. You got to be what I call it 3 deep, 3 wide. If you're not 3 deep at every position and 3 wide where a guy can play multiple positions with some of these guys, you're screwing your coach. And then you want to point the finger, oh, they're not coaching them up. No, you screwed them. You didn't do your job by getting the right guy here. And again, the coaches can't look at you and say, hey, I don't have the right guy if they didn't communicate what their scheme is, if they didn't sit down with you and really lay out what you need the tackle to do, what he looks like, give you realistic pictures. So as you're going out there shopping, you can make that cupboard with the ingredients he wants. Bill Parcells said, I should have a say in the ingredients. You should, but you know what that means? Teach me what you want so I can go to the fish market and get the fish you want. And you don't have to do that because once I get it here, coach, guess what? You spend the time preparing the meal. My job's to go shopping for you.
Yeah, right. Yep, departmentalizing. That is what I'm getting out of that, and not doing too much. Being able to work together, have those conversations, being able to mesh. We've talked about mesh a lot over the last couple of days with how players mesh. It's the same thing in organizations, in those rooms. That's a big thing that I'm getting out of there. And again, Ryan Roberts here with David Turner and John Murphy, breaking it down for another half an hour or so, trying to get to Mr. Irrelevant. We're on pick 245 right now. Dane Jackson off the board to Buffalo a little bit ago. Houston trade their pick to New Orleans. New Orleans went up in the draft a little bit to get Tommy Stevens, quarterback from Mississippi State.
I want to hear John on that one.
Yeah, John, before I recap the rest, obviously Tommy Stevens was at Penn State, transferred this offseason to Mississippi State. Give me a take there, the trade up for New Orleans to get Tommy Stevens here in the 7th.
Whatever 2022 or 2023 7th-round draft pick got traded for that. But you know what? It's an interesting thing when we were just talking about being in, having a cohesive unit and having, both sides knowing what the other one is doing. There's a very interesting pick for a team that, hey, we mentioned why the Eagles would take a Jalen Hurts, and it makes way more sense to them than it does their fans because you have a GM who understands your head coach is a guy that will be drawing up plays in his sleep, for things that he can do. So, hey, Jalen Hurts ends up playing in games, ends up being on people's radar that they have to prepare for that package. It'll be interesting to see that, can they use a guy that has phenomenal athletic ability as a quarterback, but is not at all a quarterback prospect. If he's back there and he throws the ball, it is a miracle that it happened, and only going to be on a 4th and something or a gadget play that you haven't seen in 22 years, that they run. However, he is nearly 6'4", 245, and ran 4.49. With a 34 vert, 19 on the bench, sub 4.2 shuttle, which are just ridiculous workout numbers for a guy of that size. So what you could now see is basically a jumbo Taysom Hill. And
like we used to do in Oakland when we had the running backs with Bush and the guy at Arkansas, where we'd run a wildcat with them too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what
Darren McFadden.
Yeah, McFadden.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I could now see that part of it is Tommy Stevens having like I said, just a quotient, skill set for something that is a short yardage package, but now another offset of, if you're 6'4", 245, you run like that, you're athletic, and you can, 19 on the bench for any quarterback, is an above average number. Now here's a guy that can dress. Now here's a guy that competes and can be on your roster. And I think the other thing is that while you're not going to take that complete package away from Taysom Hill immediately, if you found a guy that could be Taysom Hill-like, and you now can allow Taysom Hill to start spending more time just being a quarterback, that's something that is going to need to be done at some point of this season for them to know at year's end, where exactly is Hill at as a quarterback? Because next year in 2021, he's not running the sub package anymore. He's running the whole package. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think this is an interesting guy, and there's a few of them here. He's one that will be somebody to look at training camp. Jonathan Garvin as a super late, pick as a pass rusher, has 30-odd tackles for loss and 12 to 15 sacks during his career, down there. So, an underachiever in terms of, what they expected to get out of him when he got there. But at this point in the draft, if you're just saying traits, right, and where did the GM for the Packers come from? He's a former scout. Here's a guy with a trait, which is shows on film that he can get to the quarterback, shows on film some, production as a pass rusher. At this stage of the draft, not a bad guy to get. Happens right there again with the Buccaneers. This is one of the fastest running backs in the draft. So now you get a guy in Khalid.
Also a kick returner. He's got duality for him.
Great. Yeah. He's not as thick as that little Boston kid that the Saint Boston Scott that the Saints drafted and then ended up on the Eagles. He's a lot thinner framed kid, but he can catch out of the backfield. You can move him around, in terms of where you can line him up. And if you get the ball in his hands, right here, 245 and 246 are two of the most exciting players with the ball in their hands once they're in the open field, right? And that's another excellent, pickup for the Dolphins, in terms of somebody who can compete to make your roster, and if not, be on the practice roster. And when you throw them in the game, you're going to get something out of them, right? Because they're going to be playing because your all-purpose guy got hurt, or they're going to be playing as the last receiver dressing on the roster. We all know what kind of guy Malcolm Perry is, but then you saw what they did when they used him all week long, at the Shrine Game at a new position, and they throw him in for one play, and what does he do? So I think really good fits with some of these late round, picks. And normally the trait that it goes back to is the GMs that came from being road scouts know who to listen to and know what to listen to when you're at this point of the draft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, when I think of Sean Payton, I think of accentuating traits. I wouldn't put it past him to have a package next year. You talked about taking the reins off of Taysom Hill, letting him be the full-time quarterback. Maybe we see Tommy Stevens and Taysom Hill in the backfield at the same time at some point. Like, that would be super interesting, a little wrinkle that, you have to prepare for it. No matter if you only use it once a game or use it 3 or 4 times a game, you have to prepare for it, which is another thing that's going to go through defensive coordinators' minds. You talked about Raymond Calais going to Tampa Bay, the running back out of Louisiana. Malcolm Perry again, listed a wide receiver here from Miami. Obviously, he was an option quarterback at Navy. I think some people may be looking at maybe at running back too, running back, wide receiver, gadget opportunities potentially in an offense. You talked about Jonathan Garvin going from University of Miami to Green Bay, has some traits. Chappelle Russell, I know, has some traits too, coming out of Temple. The other linebacker, Sean Bradley, was drafted earlier, Tampa Bay. We got Chris Jackson's a safety from Marshall, who's a sort of an interesting player that I caught a little bit of. Nate Stanley goes to Minnesota, the quarterback from Iowa. And Chris Williamson just went for the cornerback to the New York Giants from Minnesota, who I believe was a Shrine Bowl player, if I remember correctly. Chris Williamson, a pretty tough kid. And I wanted to highlight here, we can only get to a couple more because we're winding down here already. Already at pick 248 now on the board. With the LA Rams, it looks like. I want to talk about the Jets because, the Jets don't usually have a ton to talk about. We want to be politically correct as possible here, but I'm really impressed with this draft. We talk about traits. We've talked about that a lot. We talk about Mekhi Becton. We talk about Denzel Mims, Ashton Davis, Jabari Zuniga. There was a lot of and they got Bryce Hall on day 3, the cornerback from Virginia, who's coming off the injury, if he came out last year, he's probably a late first, maybe an early second-round pick, and they get him at the latter part of this draft because of the injury he suffered. David, going over to you, how excited should the New York Jets fan base be about this draft? I think that this is one of the better New York Jets drafts I can remember of recent memory.
It hurts because I'm a Giants guy. I mean, that's where I cut my teeth. But Jets, Jets. I mean, Joe has really come in, organized that department, focused them on the traits they want, on the skill sets they're looking for, and they are precise on their picks. This Jets draft is solidified and organized, and it's going to be something that you're going to go back and say, what made this team? It's going to start with this draft right here. Yes, Sam Darnold and a couple other guys the last couple of years, pieces have been put in. But this draft, I think, is going to be a springboard for the Jets being a consistent winner. Again, I like consistent success, right? That's something I say a lot of. But it's something that you got to look for. And what Joe and that staff has done this year as a full-time scouting staff, it really shows through in this draft. I love what he's doing with his picks. You can see the pieces fit. Like I said, in Green Bay, I can't see the pieces fitting, and maybe it's my vision. I don't see it. But with Joe, I can see his pieces fitting in his puzzle, and they're fitting snug and nice. And I think this year is going to be a really, really good springboard for the organization. I'm loving what Joe's doing there.
Mm-hmm. And John, let's go over to your take on the Jets draft. It seems just from the outside perspective, looking at the board that they were able to put together, they got a lot more athletic. They got a lot bigger too on the front line. Mekhi Becton, your impressions of this draft?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing the last thing you just said is the first thing that's important. You can't have a good draft if your board is incorrect. If your board is not done the right way, if you're not listening to the people that are doing the job and you just are kind of haphazard with how you do things, that's sort of how your draft, looks afterwards. And I think that's the one thing that has gone on there is that you have somebody with a strong history, strong knowledge of having worked with really good people, comes in there with a set idea, and now they're following through with it. And I think the one thing that you really like if you are a Jets fan or you're paying attention to them, and on the flip side, if you're in those other 3 war rooms in Buffalo, Miami, and New England, you're sort of saying, well, normally we could count on the Jets to not be taking, good guys, and taking 5th round guys in the 3rd, and undrafted free agents and kind of being all over the place. Well, now they're not shooting themselves in the foot, and half the battle is not shooting yourself in the foot, Christian.
And getting out of your own way sometimes, right?
Yeah. Christian Hackenberg. Don't shoot yourself in the foot, because you can't then get a quarterback that can compete if you just drafted one who you think can compete but can't. right? So I think you look at it that it's a very good direction for them, and obviously a team that needs that. And I think that should allow way more confidence, a way more productive environment, and one that I thought, it put it on both sides, right? It made the coach and the coaching look bad, and I think it put Mike in a very tough position, as the GM to take an inordinate amount of the flack and cost him his job, at the end of the day. But sometimes, the listening part, is as important as anything. Just because somebody might have the hammer in the organization, I have said this a few times in the past week and other conversations I've had. Just because you have the hammer, make sure you're hitting the nail and not the other guy's thumb, right? Because it becomes really difficult to have a trusting relationship if you keep putting the nail down and I keep smashing in the thumb instead of hitting the nail, right? So make sure that what you're doing has a method to the madness of how you're doing it. And like I said the other night, you look at Becton and what does he have? High ceiling, high athletic ceiling. You know where you're using them, and you know that it's a good fit for them. They go for a receiver. What do they go for? Well, we brought in Perryman on a 1 year. What does Perryman have? Height, weight, speed. What does Mims have? Height, weight, speed. So you have kind of double up there, to say, hey, I can treat that guy. Where's he going to play? Where's he lining up for day one? And if Perryman's the starter, and I got a guy like Mims right behind him, now all of a sudden I'm starting to build depth. I'm starting to build consistency, with our roster. And then I think they hit it in a few other areas, right? The conversation about Jamal Adams doesn't seem to be going away. Maybe it does or maybe it doesn't. What's their long-term desire to pay or use Marcus May? Because Aston Davis looks like he could possibly take a run at, that job, sooner than later. And then just some of the little picks that they've made, they make way more common sense for where the roster is at. And it's adding to the compete level to say, hey, I would expect Jets training camp, in itself and in watching the practices and the preseason games to be highly more competitive than it was, a year ago. And then, like I said, you just look at the little fits. Pirine, nice combination fit, there with, Le'Veon Bell, excuse me. They have not hit on the pass rusher thing, right? That has been a sore spot, in terms of, them missing on those guys. And to go with a better play, just go with the safer guy, go with the guy that you have the film and production value with, and not worry so much, about over, selling it, to yourself and sticking to your board. I would bet the Jets will come out of this not only happy with who they ended up with, but I would bet in an interview types thing or asking behind the scenes that they much more stuck to their board and then came out of it with a value where their third round pick was at least a third round pick on their board. Their fourth and fifth was the same. You don't ever want to be chasing your board, because when that happens, it gets away from you in a hurry.
Mm-hmm. And we just had Sam Sloman, the kicker from Miami, Ohio, going to the LA Rams. So another specialist off the board. We've seen a couple, obviously, on day 3, which we usually do. And Minnesota just took Brian Cole, the safety from Mississippi State, who has an interesting backstory. He started his career at the University of Michigan as a wide receiver, was on Last Chance U at East Mississippi. Then he made the switch over to safety on a full-time basis at Mississippi State. He's kind of looked at as like a nickel type of player. So that is the last pick. We're up to number 250. So on the brink here of the end of the 2020 NFL Draft, Ryan Roberts here with John Murphy. And, I can't talk. And David Turner. Sorry, David. And I just Minnesota was the last pick, which leads me into the team that I wanted to touch on, because we talked about Justin Jefferson yesterday. We talked about Jeff Gladney, Ezra Cleveland, Cam Dantzler today, DJ Wanham. They got James Lynch. They have a lot of picks. Harrison Hand, KJ Osborne. There's a lot. Kenny Willekes even here in the last round, which I think is incredible value for this stage. We talk about a guy that doesn't have much what you would call traits, but his film's just really solid. He's a heavy-handed edge guy. But when you look at it seems like there's some gems here throughout. Minnesota has a really nice roster. They have a lot of picks here. John talked about this a little bit earlier. For a team like the Saints that might not have a ton of roster availability, a ton of roster spots up for grabs, not really dealing too much with having to really worry too much about having a ton of draft capital. For Minnesota, having this type of roster, David, do you think that this is overkill, this amount of picks? Do you like the draft they were able to put together? What do you make of this Minnesota Vikings draft in general?
I'm loving it. I love competition. I love putting pressure on people. And to me, they're sending a message. This whole thing is a message. It's like, if you're on our roster, don't be home, be comfortable. And by taking these many guys and drafting them, they're investing in these guys. Don't get comfortable. You know, we're putting people behind you to press you for your job right now. And they didn't trade away a lot of their picks. They didn't move around. I mean, they moved some. Don't get me wrong. They used some of their collateral. But entering in today, I think they had 12 picks going into today. And they drafted, I think, at this point, where they had about 13 picks or something overall. So they did make some moves and do some things. But this is a team that's, I think, you know, Rick and George Payton, who are guys that I've known my whole career. Like I said, I started with them down in Miami. And they've always believed in competition on the field and on the roster. And in this situation this year, where they have been in the playoffs but haven't finished, right? They haven't finished. They're just saying the hard conversation, guys, we're not good enough. Well, we have the draft capital. If you really want, we can go do this. And they're a great scout team. They have a great room of scouts. Their scouts are turning over stones everywhere. So these guys have done their homework. They've got their background. They've got their medical. They know what decisions they're making here. And they're setting a tone and a message to the locker room. Guys, don't be comfortable. If you're high price, you got the biggest target on your back. If you cost me the most money, you got the big. Did I just draft a kid in your position? Oh boy, because now I got a cheaper version right here on the roster. And he's on a 4-year deal. If he's in the first round, he's on a 5-year deal. So, you know, I always tell the guys when we sign the big contracts, I mean, you know what this means? And they go, yeah, I can pay for my family, blah, blah, blah. I go, no, this means you got the biggest target on your back for me to come hit and get rid of you. So if you want, you know, that's something that Tom Brady never asked for in New England. He always kept that target off his back. But now so many of these kids have the targets on their back. So.
And I mean, that's a perfect segue, because they kind of make me the last team I really want to take a deep dive on is the New England Patriots, who are moving away from the Tom Brady era. So everything is going to be under the microscope here. You know, I feel like most casual fans talk about whether it's more Brady or whether it's more Belichick. But, you know, for me, we're looking at, I feel like New England still has, you know, they focus in on what their type of player is. And this draft, I really think, just says that to a large degree. It seems like they're sticking with, well, I shouldn't say sticking with, they're going to ride it out with Jarrett Stidham, see what he is for them at the quarterback position. This draft, Kyle Duggar, the moving chess piece from Lower Rhine. We got Josh Uche. We saw Anthony Jennings, the 2 tight ends they took this today. They got Justin Herron, the offensive tackle from Wake Forest, probably going to move into guard. Michael Onwenu, the guard from Michigan. John, for you, is this a typical New England Patriots draft? Is this kind of what you usually expect from what Bill Belichick and they do over there?
Yeah, no doubt. You know, and then they'll probably be super active, you know, after the draft. But I think it shows you, you know, obviously, again, you know, they trust what they know and they trust what they like. So they see a guy that has receiving, you know, as a plus receiver, you know, at tight end, and they see it on film. And they are trusting their eyes to say, hey, I saw it this year, and we think there's more, you know, on it and coming from it. They add a guy who can be that kind of Swiss Army knife, you know, tight end, H-back, fullback, you know, great on special teams, you know, a guy that the coaching staff and, you know, and all the players there at Virginia Tech, you know, think is one of their real dudes in the locker room and, you know, one of the real, you know, high-end guys in terms of work ethic and such. And they know, hey, I just bettered my active roster, you know, with a guy like that. And like I said, last year when they ran into injuries, they were using a linebacker at fullback for a couple of weeks. You know, so clearly, you know, it's something more important to them in terms of what role that player plays and how, you know, they're able to kind of change the momentum in games, that you're now going to have to do that even more when you took it out of the quarterback's hands. Right now, you're going to have to change momentum, you know, and impact the game a lot more on special teams, you know, a lot more on plays, a lot more on the little parts of the game, like blocking downfield, you know, turning that short run or that short pass into a play and helping your quarterback, you know. So they've done that with that, you know, with that part, you know, of it. They, you know, helped the metric, you know, there, you know, in terms of, you know, doubling down. And when they saw a guy like Uche fall, they went right after it. And I think Russ yesterday made a great comparison. Hey, now in 2 years in a row, they've gone after those kind of high compete, high motor, high production guys that show up on film. Not surprising, there for them to go back to that once again. Clearly, while everyone else was not, able to do workouts, clearly they had, they focused in on a kicker who wasn't the guy that went to the Senior Bowl, wasn't the guy who went to the combine, wasn't that guy that we were talking about. But yet, here they are, and they're, and they make the first pick, as a kicker, and it turns out to be their own guy, right? So, I think until they don't have a good draft, you're going to go into it and almost say that they've had a good draft until it's proven otherwise, but they have stuck to their guns and taken a lot of guys that just seem to fit, the Patriot way, fit the kind of mold of what those guys are. And then, hey, we'll see. It doesn't seem like Newton or Winston would be a fit for them, but coming out of the draft, San Diego took a quarterback. You saw, the Colts have a backup and now took another guy. It'll be interesting to see now in the coming weeks was that whole smokescreen of, those two guys are just not the type of guy that would fit for a Belichick or Josh McDaniels team. Is that true? Or do we end up seeing somebody with a really big name but a really smaller price tag end up in New England, and now you could have a different opinion on things?
Well, I agree with you right there with the bigger name, smaller price tag, because now the market has shrunk for those guys because of the draft. So, Bill's just sitting back, letting those guys get that smaller market where then he controls the price tag. Yeah.
And we are now down to the last pick of the 2020 NFL Draft. Some great conversation here. And you guys, day 3 of the draft. Last couple picks, we had the Seattle Seahawks, LA Rams at 250, taking Tremaine Ingram, the guard from Clemson, played right tackle. He's moving inside. Miami traded their 251 pick to Seattle. They came up and they got Stephen Sullivan, who's an interesting tight end out of LSU. Thad Moss, I don't think, was drafted, if I have my things in order here. Tyree Cleveland, wide receiver from Florida to Denver. Interesting player, high recruit, tested really well, was never able to get the production that you would think of a guy from his athletic profile there at Florida. Kyle Hinton, who I know is a NFLPA Bowl guy from Washburn, who I know is a really athletic guy, 6'3", 300-pounder, guard, center versatility. And then 254, Denver Broncos, Derek Tuska, the defensive end from North Dakota State, who I assume won like 4 or 5 national championships while he was at North Dakota State. So we're down to the last pick here. While we wait for it, David, let's go over and just talk a little bit about your impressions of this draft. Maybe we'll do the parting shot a little early here. Just your takeaway from this draft overall, if you want to leave the listeners with something to think about.
I got about 3 of them. So the first one is impressive how deep this draft is. Because again, we sit back and we look into the 5th, 6th round. There were some really impressive players still sitting there. And even now, they're like John was saying, there's some guys with some really rare traits in the 7th round that you can go and they're one-trick ponies, whatever they are, but they still are going to contribute right away, and they have growth potential into being something. The other thing is how much the pro days killed the smaller school kids. We did not see a lot of small school kids. There were some guys that went from bigger schools that, again, I looked at it like, oh, man, if a workout wonder kid was here in that position, would that guy have gotten drafted? But no, he went to Notre Dame or he went to Georgia or he went to LSU or somewhere that they got the numbers. They trusted the background. They had more than one scout that went in there. So that's why this kid got drafted versus a small school kid, but that they didn't have any verification on. And I really feel sorry for the small school kids in this situation because I don't know how many teams. I mean, with all the draft picks like Minnesota took and these other teams Miami took, I don't know if they're going to sign any undrafted free agents or it's done. It's just a wrap for them. So I really feel sorry for those kids. Those are my top 2. And then my third one is, as a scout, as a personnel guy, I really respect some of these staffs, as you guys have heard this whole conversation over the last 3 days. And I think teams like Baltimore, Indianapolis, the Jets, the Giants, the Jacksonville Jaguars, San Francisco, Minnesota, Miami, they these are teams that really have big scouting. Pittsburgh Steelers, they all have great scouting staffs, and you're seeing this draft how we are raving about these teams and what they're doing. You can throw other, and again, these are all teams that are A plus. You can even throw other teams like Seattle and the Niners, and there's just teams that are out there that are. This draft has been more exciting than I thought it would be going into this whole situation, and with this virtual draft and everything, I really am excited about the coming out of this draft. There's a lot of excitement for me.
Mm-hmm. And as we wait for the New York Giants to make the Mr. Irrelevant to pick 255, John, your parting shots, as many as you want. We're still waiting here for the final pick to come off the board.
I hate the fact that these teams have used the 7th round to be poking off all my dudes. Cole McDonald, the Tulane kid, the Louisiana running back. Denver just took a kid that, is a really good high compete, small school pass rusher. So I think that's a kid that, will make his way around. If he doesn't make the Broncos, he'll make his way around some practice rosters because he's got some high compete, to him as a pass rusher, and probably would have tested a little better. I think for sure, you mentioned, Thad Moss. So Thad Moss, injury, doesn't get drafted. Trey Adams has a huge injury history, completely, off the board, doesn't get drafted. I think the medical will come back to be something that people talk about, afterwards. I think you saw guys like, whether it was, Kyle Duggar, for sure was going to get drafted, but may have gone higher because of how he performed in an all-star game, and the all-star game and the combine were kind of the last impressions people had. I think that's what rose, his level, in the draft. I think that also raised Jeremy Chinn's, level in the draft. I think even Troutman, that's allowed him to be taken above, tight ends with bigger names. I think a guy like Strobridge going to an all-star game, and instead of playing as an undersized interior guy, getting a lot of outside reps in an all-star game, probably raised his level from being a guy that kind of maybe would have been more of a 6th, 7th rounder, moving him up to, to where the Dolphins took him. I think came from seeing him, take outside reps, in the all-star game. So I think you're seeing that what teams could evaluate with their hands on was the film, the production, then the film and the practices at the all-star game, then some of the combine stuff went into effect. And then unfortunately the things that didn't happen, which was some of the interviews, probably guys that were from smaller schools that you didn't get all the background and data on. And then the injury guys, lost out, in this draft, to the guys that you had a little more, comfortability and what you would have taken. And so far, the only interesting dialogue that I've seen come out of the 3 days was seemingly the Texans were the one team that may have had something go on during the draft, where the Texans expected that there was a trade, with Detroit at pick 90, and it didn't happen at the last minute, and no one could make communication with each other, and they kind of had to stick there and make their pick. So even though they got a player for the one time during the draft, unfortunately they kind of hit the auto draft had to come into effect, so that seems like the one time in the draft where the communication and the time element involved in making a trade or, roughing out exactly what your trade was going to be didn't happen. And then there wasn't the easy communication that could have been done when you were all sitting together and maybe used, one of your other people to kind of help you out. So kind of be interesting in the days that come following this, what we kind of hear from the media and from the individual people covering those drafts. How many more storylines like that will come out about what could have, should have, would have happened if everything else would have been in play?
Mm-hmm. And the final pick just came off. Great timing there, John. Hey, Crowder, inside linebacker from Georgia, making his way to the New York Giants. And just kind of echo a couple of things I thought were pretty consistent with you guys was this. We always talk about it's a job interview. We talk about the film and then the all-star circuit, hopefully, and then the pro day circuit. For a lot of the kids, and David kind of echoed this a lot, it was a lost opportunity for them. They weren't able to get eyes on them. And then kind of what John was saying, to take advantage of those opportunities. I just received word that the NFLPA game had 15 draft picks. just to kind of show up 3 from last year. So the ability to get eyes on you is obviously important. So big opportunity as those guys were presented with. And then one thing I want to really dig into after this, and again, we're going to be live again tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern time, to talk some of the undrafted free agent stuff, some of the trackers, to talk about potential fits, give our final thoughts on the class. But I want to know for the juniors that declared early that obviously don't have those opportunities to play in the All-Star games and maybe didn't test and then they weren't able to get official numbers on. I want to see how many of those guys went undrafted. I want to see how many of those guys really suffered draft position. I think it's a really interesting conversation. Parting shots here again, 10 a.m. NFL Draft Bible. We're going to keep working here to finish this cycle out, 2020 NFL Draft. I want to thank John Murphy, David Turner for coming on with me. 3-person show today. Dakota Follett behind the scenes, thanking him so much. I'm going to spare you guys no dancing from me. I don't even really dance with my wife too much, so I'm gonna leave Rick to, if he wants to do a separate video where he's dancing, he could do that as much as you want. But from all of us here, enjoy the week so far. Make sure to come back with us tomorrow. And that's a wrap. We'll talk to you guys again soon.